Here we go. Thank you everyone for joining us for Blockchain Week. Our next event is a really intriguing conversation between Jack and Jake. So they will emphasize which one is which very, very soon. They're going to talk about within the Ethereum series. So welcome to the stage, Jake and Jack.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon to those tuning in across Australia, and if you're staying up late with us abroad, thank you. Welcome back to our limited series on Ethereum, Exploring the World's Computer. In part 2, we're actually going to learn about governance and the role of DAOs. So this is an exciting area, absolutely. Previously, you would have heard from Anthony Sassano, and you can hear more from Sass, and you can see that on the dailygway.substack.com. I encourage you to go over there and check that out for sure. Before we start today, we would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging. Day 3 of Blockchain Week is brought to you by our friends at Block 8, and this session here today is brought to you by Mycelium. My name is Jake Denny, I'm with Mycelium, and we are currently growing our team across Australia. We've got offices in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Adelaide. So if you would like to know more about that, get over to our website at mycelium.ventures/careers for all the latest. Joining me today is Jack Deeb, Head of Corporate at Mycelium. I'm Head of Communications. Jack discovered blockchain technology at university while studying law and commerce and teaching economics. Like many people who spent quality time discussing the role of digital assets and trading them, he discovered opportunities, and once discovered, he couldn't turn back. And he decided to help build crypto by focusing on the innovation around law and economics. So welcome, Jack.
Thanks, Jake. It's great to be here as a part of Blockchain Week. Steve Vallis and the rest of the team have done a great job so far. It's been great to see buy-in for both the public and private sectors. And I really look forward to witnessing the progress in Australia that's already been discussed this week.
That's great, great. So tell us, what got you interested, Jack, in this space?
Well, yeah, as you mentioned, back in 2016, I was at college. At that point in time, my friends and I were learning about projects and tokens, and that was all happening alongside quite a traditional path that I was taking through law, finance, and economics. At that time, or through those times, I was working for a fund manager and then some of the leading law and accounting firms in Australia. So as things progressed in the blockchain space, the part of blockchain technology that really gripped me was Ethereum. I think from the start, being able to watch smart people build open source transnational products using blockchain technology was something that it was quite clear was going to revolutionize both products and the companies that are building out those products. And this is something that I really hope to be a part of in the future. One of the points I'd really like to emphasize today is, I've been so lucky in the last years to work with some really amazing devs at Mycelium. I think it's clear to everyone in the space the contribution that's made by technical minds in really pushing forward the area and innovating and growing it to be the space that it is right now. My opinion from what I've seen this week and what's been going on in the last year in particular is there's still a lot of work to be done by traditional minds in business, in public and private business, and then in fields like law and accounting, in really connecting what's happening with blockchain technology to what's happening in the mainstream.
Understood. So we're talking about company structures and organizational design here. What is the problem with how traditional companies are structured today?
Well, I mean, it's useful to talk about it as a problem, but I think I'd like to point out straight away that as any lawyer would tell you, different business structures are suitable for different purposes. So in some cases, traditional companies will be fine. But in the context of blockchain technology, one problem that we can discuss from traditional corporate governance is the agency problem. So the agency problem describes the situation where a conflict of interest arises between the managers of an organization and generally its shareholders. So in Australia in particular, you have to have a director for your company, and that director is charged with the day-to-day management of your organization. The theories of shareholder primacy will suggest that directors exist to represent the interests of their shareholders. And problems that we've seen in the last couple of years and really with the rise of shareholder primacy have been things like directors paying themselves large salaries or acting with respect to the business's short-term goals. So trying to maximize profit in the current year in order to blow out their bonus in effect. So I think what we're seeing now with blockchain technology and how it compares to original companies, if you isolate for original companies, you'll notice that shareholders only sometimes get to become involved in the decision making from companies on shareholder meetings and different particular situations like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so this is where the creation of a DAO comes in, I guess. This term often gets thrown about in the crypto space, and it's easy to get lost in the lingo. And so for everyone who's tuning in, can you tell us what is a DAO?
A DAO, yeah, it's a scary one. So DAO is the acronym for Decentralized Autonomous Organization. So I define a DAO as an entity whose governance and financial infrastructure is encoded in one or more smart contracts. I think it's important when talking about DAOs to recognize that the idea of decentralized organizations is not a new one. So analogous kinds of member-managed companies have existed in some jurisdictions for many years. You can look to examples in the US, such as member-managed LLCs, and arguably you could even look to some of the partnership-type organizations that we have here in Australia. So DAO-like organizations began appearing around 2014, and within the Ethereum space in particular around 2015. And in fact, around that time, Vitalik had written the idea of DAOs and what they could do for the space in the Ethereum white paper. So they've always really been a crucial part of the Ethereum ecosystem. Getting to what a DAO is and why it's significant, I can give you an example, and I'd encourage you to think about different examples that are similar, that you would use a similar principle. So let's say you've got people A, B, and C, and they decide that they want to set up an investment vehicle. So what can be done is A, B, and C, they deploy a smart contract, and they each deposit $100 into the bank account of that smart contract, which is often referred to as a DAO treasury. From that point, what either A, B, or C can do is to put a proposal forward, which in the proposal you would say something like, I propose that we should invest in company X. And within that proposal, I would include the lines of code that if the proposal is passed, those lines of code would automatically release funds from the DAO treasury and invest it in the target investment company. So different DAOs would have different requirements for how many DAO members would need to vote in order for that to happen. But let's say A, B, and C all agree. The proposal in this case to invest in company X passes. What will happen is the DAO treasury will automatically release funds to the investee company, and the organization can proceed from there. So like all Ethereum smart contracts, DAOs are infinitely flexible. So that's one example. Particularly, I'm sure in the audience, there's people who probably are working with DAOs themselves. So it's the range of different kinds of DAOs and what they can do is mind-boggling, and I'd encourage you to all sort of look into those.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. So we're talking about decentralizing decision-making, which is pretty fascinating. We're talking about automation in decisioning. So, removing sort of the middle layers that get in between that. So that's the automation component. So how exactly does blockchain technology, what's the relevance of it in this particular use case?
So blockchain technology inherently pushes for these ideas of transparency and openness in a community. And what that means in the context of the DAO is transparency and openness for all of the stakeholders that are involved in the DAO. So as I was discussing before, in order for a DAO to do anything, a proposal needs to be put forward and then after that accepted in order for that action to be taken. If the proposal isn't accepted, then the organization and its treasury or the smart contracts that it controls will do nothing. But one really important part about this is that often this proposal and vote process happens in an open environment. So we're seeing particularly the larger DAOs in the Ethereum space at the moment are using discussion forums to allow their members and actually just general members of the public to comment and share their opinions on whether or not a proposal is a good idea or a bad idea or something else. So of course, this discussion happens, and then if the proposal succeeds, then not only is that the record of that conversation forever stored ideally on the discussion forum, but you'll also have a permanent and immutable record of that decision occurring on the blockchain, in this context, the Ethereum blockchain. So I think that this idea that most stakeholders in most DAOs can view all of the not only decisions, but the decision-making process for all of the things that the DAO does is a really, really important one. And today I'd like to talk about that concept as a movement away from the idea of shareholder primacy to the idea of stakeholder primacy. So that would be where all activity for the DAO is fully public and all stakeholders can have visibility and even input into what an organization does. So I would encourage you to think about how significant this idea is for the variety of stakeholders that may be considered in what a DAO is doing. These can be stakeholders like regulators, and that's been discussed a lot this week. There might be stakeholders like potential employees. There might be stakeholders like potential contractors. But this idea of observing the inner workings of a company, has really great benefits for people outside those who are actually interested in financially in the company. A really good example of this came from Joni Pirovich, who's here this week. She's a tax lawyer and really interested in the idea of transactional or tax on event taxation systems. So, for example, the ATO would then be able to view all of the decisions, so all of the considerations of the company, and then actually view those transactions take place, and then, tax on event, watch the transaction take place and proceed on that basis.
Wow, that's fascinating. We've come a long way in the ideas of this, and stakeholder primacy is a very interesting term too. I think quite empowering as a phrase. What would you say where we are currently and everything that's been evolved and discussed? Where are we? What's holding DAOs back right now? Like what is that? Where are we at now? Well,
as I alluded to earlier, DAOs were first seen largely as a prototype sort of type versions around 2014. I'm sure it would be remiss of me not to mention the DAO that launched and then infamously crashed in 2016, and all of the other DAO sort of experiments that have happened since that place. But corporate governance is a field that's existed for many years, hundreds of years, right? Maybe even longer. We're in the very early stages of DAOs, the decentralized style of governance, and where it can be taken. In terms of the problems that are often talked about in the context of DAOs today, I think the big one is regulation. So right now, if Jake and I were to deploy a DAO, one of the problems that we would have is that DAO wouldn't be necessarily recognized by as a legal entity under the existing regulatory regime in Australia. And there's been commentary on the impacts of this being things like a DAO cannot legally own its own assets, and that's inspired this idea of a DAO having a treasury that we discussed before. The DAO can't enter into contracts, which is a really crucial part for most businesses in operating in any industry. The DAO can't sue or be sued, and then members of the DAO, and this is really the one that I think is spoken about the most, can potentially be exposed to the liability for the actions of the DAO. So what we're seeing is almost this reactionary approach where it's unclear, what DAOs are in the eyes of the law, and yet, at least in the blockchain community, there is just such excitement and such reassurance from existing DAOs about how big of an impact DAOs will have in the space. So what we've seen is, there are many DAOs. DAOs are doing many great things right now, and people have been forced to, operate by just innovation, pretty much. So what we've seen is two different kinds of DAOs, generally speaking. You've got wrapped DAOs and you've got unwrapped DAOs. So a wrapped DAO refers to a DAO that has been registered as an entity within an existing legal framework. So a great example of this and some really great progress has been achieved by Aaron Wright and his team at Open Law, who have done some work in Wyoming recently, where subsequent to that, we've seen the pass of the DAO bill, at least in the Wyoming Senate, where the DAO bill will allow DAO entities to register as effectively member-managed LLCs within that jurisdiction, and that will resolve some of those problems that we talked about earlier. However, the more common route for DAOs to take is actually, this is talking with respect to the current Ethereum ecosystem, is to go an unwrapped DAO approach. So a lot of the big projects that that we all know in the Ethereum ecosystem will incorporate an unwrapped DAO somewhere in their structure. So the problem with an unwrapped DAO is that it doesn't have legal personality. There's been no steps to register it in any jurisdiction. So the point of concern for some lawyers would then be that DAO can be interpreted as an unregistered association or a general partnership. Mainly for liability reasons, that's going to be problematic for DAO members. So that's not the end of the story. There's been some really interesting developments for unwrapped DAOs as well. One of the ones that I would point you towards is the developments under contract law, so with the participation agreement. So this would be where a DAO writes rules under contract, which will govern the rights and obligations as between the DAO members and other entities that become involved in the DAO, like service providers or entities like that. So I have to give a shout out to Silky El Rafay and the team at Gnosis. At least to my mind, were the first to draft a participation agreement and get it out into the market with the DX DAO. And also, I'd have to mention that there are other interesting developments under international law, which is a fun area for a lot of lawyers that probably stops at university. But under international law, there's a group of really preeminent blockchain professionals who've joined the Koala organization. So for all the Aussies on the call, that's Koala, but with a C instead of a K. And so the Koala organization is set out to really raise the bar for legitimacy for DAOs in the country and around the world. And they aim to do that by writing the model law for DAOs, where we hope that by custom and actually by regulatory implementation, that those rules will then go on to govern the different DAOs that end up being spun up around the world.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, that's great, and thanks for sharing. Very complicated topic, and it's evolving at quite a clip. So a lot of smart people have dedicated their careers to this field in particular, and trying to ensure that the world's computer has a legal framework to be able to operate on as well. And so really, really important. The great thing about this now is we get to take some questions. So if you've got any questions, feel free to drop them into the chat, and we can address those. It's like there's a bit of okay, we're feeling a little bit tired on day 3, I think. There's a lot. Okay, so look, if you don't have any questions, if you have them in the future, by all means, please direct them. You'll be able to find Jack. Where would we find you, actually?
Best place to reach me is on LinkedIn. So just search Jack Deeb on LinkedIn, shoot me a message. Happy to talk about anything discussed today. And of course, at Mycelium, we do a range of things. So happy to talk about any of those as well. So feel free to reach out. Excellent, excellent.
Look, actually, there is a question that we just got in the chat here. Are there any legal consequences to having off-chain and on-chain hybrid DAOs that use Snapshot or something similar? Okay, great technical question. Jack, can you break that down for people?
Yeah, so I mean, this is going to be a frustrating answer for some, but I think the answer would have to be it depends. It's been great to see entities use off-chain and on-chain components, but I think it would really have to depend on which components of that entity were on-chain and which components of that entity were off-chain. I think solutions like Snapshot are actually really, really powerful for going back to what we discussed earlier in terms of visualizing what kinds of decisions are being made by a company and how are those decisions being made.
So can you give some context to what is Snapshot? What does Snapshot solve as a tool?
Yeah, so going back to the point in the DAO process where I'm shareholder A within this ABC DAO, and I've proposed that the DAO should invest in company X, that decision would be put forward as a proposal on Snapshot. The idea there is that Snapshot provides a nice mechanism and interface for then the other members of the DAO, in this case, members B and C, to go in and see the decision and vote on the decision. And then after they voted on the decision, it will then be stored as a 3 yes, 0 no vote in Snapshot for all of those members and other members of or stakeholders of that DAO to view the outcome.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for explaining that. Good question. Another one of the questions that we've just received here is what role do DAOs play in DeFi? And DeFi, just for everybody's benefit from yesterday, is decentralized finance. So on the blockchain, in particular on Ethereum, and financial contracts. So, Jack.
Yeah, DAOs play an incredible and also very large part in DeFi as it exists today. DAOs form, a number of different, or fulfill a number of different purposes in DeFi. And so it's hard to talk about all of those in one answer. I mentioned earlier, Aaron Wright, the team in OpenLaw, they actually did go forward and create this sort of ABC DAO type structure, and then went on to register it as a member managed LLC in Delaware, actually, and they've called it the LAO. I encourage viewers to go and see the LAO and how it operates, and you'll be able to see some of the principles and steps that we've discussed here today. But essentially the idea is that as a member of the LAO, I can go and say, this company looks like a really great company for investment. I can voice that decision in the various public discussion channels that the LAO has. And then it will eventually, if I don't sound like an idiot within the community, then it might get put forward as a proposal. And then the members of the LAO can vote on that to actually go forward and invest. And the idea is then that all the investments of the LAO are held on behalf of all of the LAO members. So it's a shared benefit. It's an amazing sort of community feel to that style of investment, and something that I certainly haven't seen done well in the traditional finance world.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've just got another question as well on the scalability, and I guess that's an interesting question when you're talking about organizations. So the question, how scalable are DAOs for creating larger corporate structures? And is there a limit to the amount of people that can contribute to a DAO?
Yeah, so DAOs are incredibly scalable, and there is no limit to the number of members that a DAO can have. Which is particularly in the context of comparing the traditional world of corporate governance to DAOs and how they're operating today, is really one of the most amazing parts of a DAO. The fact that Jake and I could spin up a DAO today, and then in a year's time, there'll not only be Jake and I, but there might be a million other DAO members all contributing to this DAO, is something that completely blows my mind. And the other part about DAOs that makes them incredibly scalable is the example of an investment decision was only one example of what a proposal can actually decide to do. So as I sort of alluded to before, I can create a proposal to change the way that the governance mechanism works within that DAO. So for example, that could look like at the starting point, it requires a 50% majority for a proposal to pass. I can actually put a proposal forward to raise that requirement to a 75% voting requirement in order for the proposal to pass. And if you think about where that leads to, and as I was talking about before, the infinite flexibility of Ethereum smart contracts, a DAO may not only have 1 million members, at time one, but it may also look completely different at time one. So it's really, really incredible opportunities that are available for those that can get around the technology and build on Ethereum. Excellent.
Look, the questions are coming in thick and fast here, so I'll do my best to get to as many of them as we can. But one here, difficult one to answer, but from Lucy, what are the best DAOs?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's hard to answer that one without giving investment advice. So I'll tread carefully and give a disclaimer. This is not financial advice, but I've really enjoyed seeing some of the different kinds of DAOs. So one of the earlier kinds of DAOs that wasn't a token-based DAO was the Malot DAO and that kind of structure. I really like pointing to that kind of DAO because I think the strength of the community has been really, really incredible to watch. Particularly for those investment style DAOs, a lot of people I think have this idea about this space where it's a bit, pump and dump. It's not something that, I'd say, but it's certainly said. And the idea that, you've got all these people that get excited about becoming a DAO member and these ideas of governance, and it's still existing, years down the track. It's done incredibly well, and the community has also done incredibly well. People are happy, people know what's going on, and the business operation is succeeding, which I think is really the most important part.
Success of companies, that's ultimately the entire point of this, right? We've got one last question because we're about to run out of time, and we're actually back straight after this with another session with Bocky Poo Bar, so please tune in for that. So the last question we're going to end on is, any thoughts on novel voting structures of DAOs? And the example here is quadratic voting. Now, we don't necessarily need to get into that, but Jack, are you optimistic about the innovation happening in this space with DAOs?
Yeah, for sure. I think I don't want to come across as a skeptic, but I think that at least within corporate governance as it exists today within Australia, most companies operate using the same rules. So Jake and I, if we went our separate ways and both set up companies, there's quite a high likelihood that the governance for each of our companies would be exactly the same. And what I like about DAOs is that that's not what we've seen. By default, different DAOs, depending on who's involved and what they like, at time 0 or at time 1, again, because it might change, will really determine the governance and the voting mechanism for the DAO. And I like that question as well because, different voting mechanisms, again, it's infinitely flexible what the voting mechanism can look like. So the idea of quadratic voting is an interesting one and can be applied in a variety of ways, as in changing the weighting of the vote that A, B, and C may have on a particular proposal. You wouldn't want A to buy up all of these governance tokens, which would allow A to vote on the DAO, and then have a largely disproportionate actually impact to that impact that B and C would have, when the idea is that you would want to spread that governance anyway. It's really my belief that we will see some voting mechanisms that we have never seen before in the traditional world. And it's something that we should all be really excited about.
Excellent. Well, look, we're at time. Thanks for tuning in. Obviously, as Jack had mentioned, you can get him on LinkedIn. So that's Jack Deeb, D-E-E-B. And I believe everyone can spell Jack. That's going to be fine. Look, today is brought to you by Block 8, and this session is brought to you by Mycelium. Like I mentioned earlier, the team is growing, and if you'd like to be part of this movement, get over to mycelium.ventures/careers and come make history with the team. Now, please, 2 minutes later, we're going to be back. We're going to be back with Bocky, and do not miss this one. There's some big news to be dropped. So thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon and the rest of the week. Thank you.
Thanks all.